A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Alright, we have a fascinating one today. Daniel sent us a prompt that really digs into the DNA of how we talk to each other without wires. He wrote, "In recent episodes, we discussed frequency hopping and burst transmission as integral to military networks. We made the point, in the case of the rescue of the American airmen, that these technologies are actually every bit as important as encryption. When did these technologies date back to? And what are the civilian applications that face downstream of this innovation?"
Herman Poppleberry here, and Corn. I am so glad he brought this up. We often talk about encryption as the big shield, right? The lock on the door that keeps your data safe. But what Daniel is pointing to here is the invisibility cloak. If an enemy can find you, they don't need to read your emails, they just need to send a kinetic response to your coordinates.
It's the difference between someone knowing what you're saying and someone knowing exactly where you're standing while you're saying it. And by the way, for everyone listening, today's episode of My Weird Prompts is actually being powered by Google Gemini 1.5 Flash. It's writing our script today, which is fitting because we're talking about the deep logic of data transmission. So, Herman, let's start with the basics for the uninitiated. Before we get into the 1940s and Hollywood actresses, what are we actually talking about when we say frequency hopping and burst transmission?
At its most fundamental level, frequency hopping is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of sitting on one radio frequency, say 100.3 megahertz, and broadcasting your signal there continuously, you jump. You spend a tiny fraction of a second on one frequency, then hop to another, then another. If you and the receiver both have the map of where you're going to hop next, you can stay in sync. To an eavesdropper who doesn't have that map, it just sounds like random static popping up across the dial.
But wait. How do they stay in sync without drifting? If my watch is 1 second fast and yours is 1 second slow, after a few minutes of hopping at high speed, wouldn't we be talking into the void?
That is the million-dollar engineering question. In modern systems, we use atomic clocks or highly stable crystal oscillators, but the logic remains the same, a pre-shared pseudo-random sequence. Both the sender and receiver have a mathematical formula that says, at time x, go to frequency y. It looks random to a stranger, but it's perfectly deterministic to the insiders. If you lose the beat, you lose the conversation.
And burst transmission? That sounds like the radio version of a quick whisper in a dark room.
That is a great way to put it. Burst transmission, or squirt transmission as it was called in the old days, is about compression and speed. Instead of talking for 10 minutes, you record your message, compress it down into a tiny packet, and blast it out in a few milliseconds. It's high power, extremely short duration. The goal there is low probability of intercept, or LPI. You want to be on the air for such a short window that the enemy's direction-finding equipment can't even lock onto the signal.
So, if I'm a down pilot in 1995 or 2024, like the cases Daniel mentioned, I'm not just keying a mic and saying help. I'm at these coordinates. I'm letting a machine send a millisecond-long burst that hops across 50 frequencies. By the time the bad guy's radar even registers a blip, the message is already sitting in a satellite's inbox, and my radio is silent again.
Precisely. Think of it like a game of Marco Polo, but Marco only shouts for a microsecond and then teleports to a different corner of the pool. By the time Polo turns their head, the sound is gone and the source has moved. That tech didn't just appear out of thin air, though. It has this wild, almost cinematic origin story. Most people point to the 1942 patent by Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil.
Which is the part that always sounds like an urban legend. Hedy Lamarr was a massive MGM movie star, literally billed as the most beautiful woman in the world, and she's inventing torpedo guidance systems in her spare time.
It sounds fake, but it's 100% real. U.S. patent 2,292,387. Lamarr was actually highly intelligent and had been married to Friedrich Mandel, an Austrian arms merchant, before the war. She'd sat in on high-level dinners where they discussed the technical failures of radio-controlled torpedoes. The problem back then was that if you controlled a torpedo via a single radio frequency, the Germans could just find that frequency, blast noise at it, and the torpedo would go off course. It was called jamming, and it made expensive torpedoes useless.
So she teams up with George Antheil, who, wait, he was a composer, right? Not exactly a radio engineer. How does a musician help with naval weaponry?
He was an avant-garde composer famous for a piece called Ballet Mécanique, which used 16 synchronized player pianos. This is the aha moment. They realized that if they could use the mechanism of a player piano, the perforated paper rolls, they could synchronize the transmitter on the ship and the receiver in the torpedo. They proposed using 88 frequencies, one for every key on a piano. The paper rolls would spin at the same speed, telling both ends of the conversation which key or frequency to hit at any given millisecond.
It's brilliant because it solves the synchronization problem without computers. If you don't have a microchip to keep time, you use a physical mechanical clock. But didn't the Navy basically laugh them out of the room at the time?
They did. They told her she should go sell war bonds instead, which she did very successfully. The Navy thought the mechanical piano mechanism was too bulky and unreliable for a torpedo. Imagine a paper roll getting soggy or jammed inside a vibrating torpedo hull. It wasn't until the 1950s, when transistors started replacing vacuum tubes and mechanical rolls, that the military started taking spread spectrum seriously. The first real-world deployment of frequency hopping at scale was actually during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 on secure ship-to-shore links.
So it took 20 years for the tech to catch up to the idea. That seems to be a recurring theme with these weird prompts. The theory is there, but the hardware is a nightmare. But Herman, let's look at the other half of Daniel's question. What about burst transmission? Was that also a Hollywood invention, or was that more of a spooks in the shadows thing?
That was definitely the spooks. During World War II, the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, and the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, had a massive problem. They would drop agents into occupied France or the Netherlands with these heavy B-2 radio sets hidden in suitcases. To send a message back to London, an agent had to tap out Morse code for sometimes 20 or 30 minutes.
And that's plenty of time for the Gestapo to drive a van around the block with a directional antenna.
The German Abwehr had these incredibly efficient direction, finding teams called Funkabwehr. They could triangulate a signal in minutes. If you were on the air for more than 5 or 10 minutes, you were basically signing your own death warrant. So the engineers developed these burst encoders. The most famous ones were post-war, like the GRA-71. The agent would write their Morse code onto a magnetic tape or a mechanical drum at a normal speed. Then they'd hook it up to the transmitter and squirt the whole thing out at 300 words per minute.
So instead of ... over 10 minutes, the listener in London just hears a single zip sound that lasts less than a second. But how does the person on the other end actually read that? If it's just a zip, do they have to record it and slow it down?
That's exactly what they did. The receiving station in England would record the high-speed burst onto a tape deck and then play it back at a fraction of the speed so a human operator could transcribe the Morse. It was a race against physics. By the time the German direction-finding van even saw the needle jump on their equipment, the agent was already packing their suitcase and heading for the back door.
Okay, so we've established the how and the when. It's wartime desperation meeting musical synchronization and clandestine speed. But Daniel's prompt asks about the civilian applications downstream of this. And this is where it gets crazy, because we are literally surrounded by this tech right now. If you're listening to this on Bluetooth headphones, you are using Hedy Lamarr's brain.
You really are. Bluetooth is the most direct descendant of that 1942 patent. People forget that the 2.4 gigahertz band, where Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and your microwave oven live, is incredibly crowded. It's a mess of interference. If Bluetooth just picked one frequency and stayed there, your music would cut out every time you walked past a router or someone turned on a baby monitor.
So how does Bluetooth handle it? Is it just hopping like the torpedoes?
It's doing exactly that, but on steroids. Bluetooth uses adaptive frequency hopping, or AFH. It hops 1600 times per second across 79 different channels. But here's the smart part that makes it adaptive. It actually monitors which channels are noisy. Maybe your neighbor's Wi-Fi is hogging channel 10 and it marks those as bad. It then dynamically adjusts its hopping pattern to avoid those congested channels.
1600 times a second. That is wild. It's basically playing a game of the floor is lava with electromagnetic interference, and it's doing it so fast that your ears never notice a gap in the audio. But what happens if two devices hop to the same place at the same time? If I have 10 people in a room all using Bluetooth, aren't they going to collide?
That's the beauty of the statistical spread. It's for collision avoidance. Think about a crowded office. You might have 50 people with Bluetooth mice, keyboards, and headphones in a small area. If they were all on a single frequency, it would be a cacophony. But because they are all hopping on different pseudo-random patterns, the chance of two devices colliding on the same frequency at the exact same millisecond is statistically very low. And if they do collide, they just drop one tiny packet and move to the next frequency. You never notice a skip in your Spotify playlist because the error correction fills in the gap.
It's a massive upgrade in efficiency. It's the difference between 50 people trying to shout through one megaphone versus 50 people having whispered conversations in a room. But what about burst transmission? Where does the spook squirt show up in our daily lives?
It's the foundation of the entire modern internet and cellular network. Think about how your phone handles a text message or a data packet. In the old days of analog cell phones, the big bricks from the 80s, when you made a call, you were holding a specific frequency for the duration of that call. It was very wasteful. Only a few people could talk at once in a given cell tower's range because each person needed their own dedicated lane.
Right. Because once the slots were full, no one else could get a signal. You'd get a busy tone just trying to connect to the network.
But modern networks use packet switching and burst logic. When you send an SMS or load a web page, your phone isn't maintaining a continuous open pipe. It's breaking that data into tiny bursts, packets, and squirting them out in the gaps between other people's data. This is time division multiple access, or TDMA. This is how a single cell tower can support thousands of users. We are all essentially sharing the same airwaves by taking turns in millisecond-long bursts.
It's the squirt transmission applied to the mass market. And it's not just phones. Daniel mentioned the American Airman Rescue, which use the PRC-112 or the newer CCL radios. Those send short-burst GPS coordinates. That sounds exactly like what an AirTag or a satellite tracker does.
It is. If you have an Iridium satellite tracker like a Garmin InReach for hiking in the backcountry, it uses something called short burst data, or SBD. It's not trying to maintain a voice call with the satellite. That would take too much power and be too unreliable. Instead, it wakes up, finds a satellite, squirts your coordinates in a tiny data packet, and goes back to sleep. It's the exact same logic. Minimize the time you are on the air to save battery and ensure the message gets through a narrow window of opportunity.
I find it fascinating that the military developed this to hide from the enemy, but we use it to hide from ourselves, or rather, to hide our devices from each other's interference. It's a transition from safety through obscurity to reliability through density.
That's a great way to frame it. In the military context, the noise is intentional. It's the enemy trying to jam you. In the civilian world, the noise is just us. It's the sheer volume of devices we want to use. We've taken these tools of electronic warfare and turned them into tools of electronic harmony.
Although there's a flip side to this. If you're a developer or a tech-curious listener, understanding these protocols changes how you look at security. We talk a lot about end-to-end encryption, but if your device is broadcasting a unique frequency hopping pattern, you're still visible in a sense. There's a whole world of metadata in the physical layer of the radio waves.
Oh, absolutely. Even if I can't read your Bluetooth data, I can identify that a specific device is present because of its unique radio signature or the way it handles its hopping. This is why some high-security facilities ban Bluetooth and Wi-Fi entirely. It's not just about the data, it's about the presence. If a sensor sees a Bluetooth hop pattern that it recognizes as belonging to your phone, it knows you're in the building, even if your phone is silent and encrypted.
It's like the airman again. The encryption on his radio might be unbreakable, but if the enemy sees a burst coming from behind a specific ridge, they don't need the code. They just need a mortar.
And that brings up a really interesting point about GPS. GPS is, in many ways, a massive exercise in spread spectrum technology. The signal coming from those satellites is actually below the noise floor. If you just looked at the spectrum with a standard receiver, you wouldn't even see the GPS signal. It's buried in the background static of the universe.
Wait, how do we receive it then? If it's quieter than the static, how does my phone find it? That seems like trying to hear a whisper during a jet engine takeoff.
Because your phone knows the code, the specific mathematical pattern the satellite is using to spread its signal. By correlating the incoming noise with that known pattern, your phone can pull the signal out of the static. It's like being in a stadium with 50,000 people screaming, but you're listening for a specific friend who is clapping in a very specific rhythm. Even if they are quieter than the crowd, if you know the rhythm, you can find them.
That is incredible. So the signal is hidden not by being a short burst, but by being so spread out and thin across the spectrum that it looks like nothing.
It's called Direct Sequence Spread Spectrum, or DSSS. It's the cousin of frequency hopping. Instead of jumping frequencies, you spread your data across a wide band all at once, but at a very low power level. It's another way to achieve that low probability of intercept goal. The military loves it because it's hard to jam. You have to jam the entire wide band, which takes a lot of energy.
So, looking forward, how does this evolve? We are moving into 5G, 6G, and the Internet of Things, where literally every toaster and light bulb has a radio. Are we just going to keep hopping faster?
We have to. The spectrum is a finite resource. It's like land, they aren't making any more of it. As we crowd more devices into the same airwaves, our hopping and bursting algorithms have to become more intelligent. We're moving toward cognitive radios that can actually sense the environment in real time and find tiny millisecond-long holes in the spectrum to squeeze data through.
It's like a high-speed game of Tetris played at the speed of light. If the blue block is a Wi-Fi packet and the red block is a Bluetooth hop, the cognitive radio has to find the empty space to drop its own data block.
It really is. And it all goes back to that player-piano role. It's the same logic of synchronization. If two devices can perfectly agree on when and where to look, they can communicate through an incredibly noisy or hostile environment. We are even seeing this in modern automotive tech radar systems, and cars use frequency hopping so that your car's radar doesn't get confused by the radar of the car driving toward you.
I think the takeaway for me here is that we often take the magic of wireless for granted. We just expect our AirPods to work and our GPS to find us. But every time you walk through a city and your phone stays connected, there is a silent battle of frequency hopping and burst transmissions happening millions of times a second just to keep that connection alive.
It's an invisible infrastructure, and I think it gives you a new appreciation for those early pioneers. Hedy Lamarr wasn't just a pretty face on a screen. She was thinking about the fundamental physics of communication in a way that the experts of her time couldn't even grasp. She saw the rhythm of the radio.
And the SOE agents in France, squirting their messages and then diving for cover. It puts the struggle of a slow Wi-Fi connection into perspective, doesn't it? At least no one is driving a direction, finding van toward your living room because your Netflix is buffering.
Hopefully not. But it's a good reminder that robustness in tech often comes from these high-stakes life-or-death design requirements. We have the internet, because agents needed to hide from the Gestapo. We have Bluetooth because torpedoes needed to evade jammers. Even the ping of a sonar or the chirp of a modem has its roots in trying to stay alive in a world of noise.
It's the dual-use nature of technology at its finest. So, if you're listening and you want to actually see this in action, you can actually get cheap software-defined radio or SDR dongles for like $30. You can plug them into your computer and literally watch the hops of Bluetooth or the bursts of smart meters on a waterfall display. It's a great way to realize that the air around you is absolutely screaming with data.
It's a crowded room corn. We're just lucky we have such good filters to make sense of it all. Without these techniques, our modern world would simply go silent under the weight of its own interference.
Well, I think we've thoroughly unpacked Daniel's prompt. From Hedy Lamar's piano rolls to the squirt transmissions of the Cold War, to the Bluetooth in your ears right now. It is a straight line of innovation driven by the need to be invisible.
And it's a line that's only going to get more complex as we move into the next generation of wireless. The invisibility part might become less about hiding from enemies and more about hiding from the sheer noise of our own civilization.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap this one up. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us in sync, hopefully better than those 1940s torpedoes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We couldn't do this deep dive without that horsepower.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this dive into the invisible world of radio, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It really helps other curious minds find the show.
We are also on Telegram. Just search for My Weird Prompts to get notified whenever a new episode drops.
We'll see you in the next one. Stay curious and maybe keep an eye out for those direction-finding vans.
Goodbye, everyone. Keep hopping.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show.